Hey WBE fans, it's your friend Choice CJ here, and I am excited to be coming along for this video with my good pal, General Tar Heel. What's up, Ben?
Hey, what's good, everyone? Looking forward to playoffs for the WBE. CJ, we are officially done with the regular season, and we are looking for the contenders of the belt.
That's right. Geez, it's been so long in the making. It felt like week one was just yesterday. And like you said, the competitors that are remaining are competing for the first ever Pokemon Draft League wrestling belts. So the stakes are high. Everyone's going to be bringing their A game, and as we do every week, Ben and I are here to break down the matchups, tell you who has the edge, who we expect to come out ahead, and we're going to review everybody's picks, not only the analysts, but of course you, the fans, as well. Before we get into all of that, we're finally going to take a moment to recap the pick'em results from the regular season. We know that for the last several weeks these have been missing. It's been a little bit hard to tally up all the results as some of the games have been slow to come in for good reasons. Lots of folks were traveling for Pokemon Worlds, and then school was starting up for a lot of our coaches. So there's a lot to balance, but we can happily say that now that playoffs are here, we are all caught up. So what I'd like to do is just point your attention to the records, and we basically have a top three in terms of the overall winning percentage. Coming in at number 3 is Uzi Gunner, your favorite analyst turned WBE coach. Big shoutouts to Uzi, of course, for the amazing turnaround that he had on his team this season. He took over an 0-5 team, went 7-1 to make it into playoffs, including a huge win last week over the Florida Gators and its Gator. Uzi did lock himself to win that game, so that is some great confidence there, and gets you really excited about playoffs. So he was doing double duty as a coach and as a Pick'ems analyst. He is in 3rd place. In 2nd place, we have you guys, the fans. You guys, even though we did not count the first 2 weeks of results, if you look at it just purely on winning percentage, the fans, I believe, have like a 74.6% winning percentage, which is looking really solid. They finished with 11-0 on their locks in the regular season, so that is quite nice. But in 1st place, just barely ahead of the fans, you've got your boy on the other side of the mic from me here, General Tar Heel, with a 75.2% winning percentage. So we're going to see if the fans can overtake Ben in the playoffs, but I'm sure Ben is going to be trying his hardest to analyze the heck out of every single one of these matchups so he does not miss any of these picks.
It is time to unlock the big brain. I am not going to allow y'all to sweep this victory from underneath my feet. This is my show. It might be for you people, but this is mine, and CJ's, but mine, and I will win.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say it's mine, but I'm like not really doing that hot. I guess I'm technically in I'm in 5th place. And then Chris Cobain looks like he is in 4th place. So I'm like better than average, but that's not really saying all that much in terms of our I'd rather be winning, and nothing else besides that really matters. Whether you're 2nd or you're 5th or you're last, it's all the same.
That's fair, CJ, but you are perfect on locks.
That's true. I was the only analyst or people on the Pick'em crew to get perfect on locks. So locks will probably be most important for tiebreakers and not much else, but it is a nice little consolation prize, so I'll take that. The one thing I do want to say before we get into the games is just a little explanation of how we're going to score the playoffs. So as we go through the playoffs, there's actually, there's going to be fewer games because there are fewer teams playing each week. But we want the playoffs to feel like they still matter more in terms of the pick'ems. Because basically, like, if we just said it's going to be, the 15 or so playoff games that we're going to have, then the standings at the end of playoffs are basically going to look like how they do right now. So to give some more weight to the playoff pick'ems, we've decided to make each progressing round worth more points. So what I mean by that is that for this first round of playoffs, the games are going to count for double, whether you win or lose. In the quarterfinals, it's going to be triple. In the semifinals, it's going to be quadruple. And then in the finals, it's going to be quintuple the number of points. So it's just a way to give some extra weight to playoffs and add some stakes to these final rounds of pick'ems to make things a bit more exciting. I hope that sounds good to you guys. I'm really excited to see if any of the analysts who are a little bit further down the rankings have the ability to hop into the top 3 or even into the very top spot in terms of winning percentage. I think that's going to be really fun to watch. So without any further ado, Ben, I've been shouting a whole lot over here. I want to give you the floor and go ahead and break down your first matchup for the playoffs here.
Thank you very much, CJ, for passing it on. Yeah, you did go on for quite a while, but I appreciate the great in-depth analysis everyone's been waiting for the stats of all the pick'ems. But getting into the first game for playoffs, we have the New Orleans Pelicans coached by Pokemon going up against the South Texas Sableyes and In Vivid Color. Now, these teams actually just recently faced in Week 13. They brought less serious teams, of course, to their Week 13 match, knowing that they had a likely chance of playing in playoffs, and sure enough, they're facing round 1 right here. John did show, however, that he likes to bring Scarf Diggersby and Sash Zam to always feel safe. He said it a lot in his commentary during that battle if Vivid opts to look at that video. And in general, they decided they were going to bring a few heat sets and then just some standard mons, and he just showed that that was his way of dealing with any potential surprises. John's just very comfortable with those two mons in general. Vivid, however, brought a blue set with Mew that actually could potentially win a game in general. He brought a Speed Pass Mew into Tapu Bulu, which is actually terrifying for John's team, but did not work, unfortunately, mainly because of the Sash Sam and everything else. So he was able to capitalize on that. But also there was a Sneasel that was at the beginning of the fight for Vivid that was actually just thrown away, but I think Sneasel has an amazing matchup when it comes down to it. So that's definitely a few things you have to watch out for looking into this match. But in general, for the South Texas Sableyes, I think the biggest threats they have are Hawlucha and Sneasel. When it comes down to it, either an SD or a substitute Hawlucha with either set is looking very strong. Sash Zam is probably going to be the designated counter to Hawlucha. You do not have, like, in general, a bulky Psychic or something to deal with this Lucha the best way possible. A bulky Intimidate Immense might be pretty good. Or, yeah, like some other check, like maybe the Mudsdale, as CJ actually mentioned last week in the analysis as he went over this game. But nothing really too special there. Hawlucha is, like, honestly a big threat. But I think Hawlucha is not really looking to sweep, if so just wall break, and break that Sash for Zam. Because if you break the Sash for Zam, a Swords Dance, a Life Orb Sneasel is actually looking extremely dangerous, especially if you pack it with Life Shard, or Ice Shard. The only thing that could really help deal with that Sneasel is probably a very defensive Vaporeon, and you're easily able to get chip off first Vaporeon if it is like potentially Hawlucha and John already has it out or something of the sort, or if you're like have Nidoking and you're forcing it to take all the special hits, and if you do get Rocks up, then Vaporeon will, of course, will be taken chip by that. But once you're able to get it like around the 75% range, that's dying to a +2 knockoff from a Life Orb Sneasel if it's a max defensive Vaporeon. So you're able just to sweep from basically the remainder of the game with the likes of knockoff Icicle Crest and Ice Shard. That's just about all you need. One of the potential counters that we could see to that is like a Mach Punch Magmar. Would really like to see that. I feel like that could definitely catch Vivid off guard if you think Sneasel's kind of just a free win. So you have to be a little bit aware of that. As for the Sableyes bulk, I definitely see a standard like Spadef, Stallbreaker, Mew looking very well, along with like a Max Spadef, Mega Aggron. Mega Aggron, of course, having the already amazing natural physical defensive bulk that it really doesn't need to add too much more to it. Also, if you are Max Spadef on Mega Aggron, you are never two-shot by Earth Power from Mega Diancie, which is very important because it is your most reliable steal, and switch in to the Mega Diancie in order to deal with that. It also is able to potentially take 2 Focus Blasts from Sash Zam in grassy terrain after it gets the recovery from that, so that's also great to look out for. Also, there's just the chance that you miss a 70% Focus Blast, so you have to be very wary of that. As for the Mew, though, of course you're running Spadef for like the Alakazam, helps with the Mega Diancie a little bit more, everything like that. You can just run a standard Defog, Roost, Ice Beam, U-Turn. I feel like that just really supports the team overall. U-Turn gives you some great momentum, especially if you're like coming down Vaporeon, since you don't really have the best Scald switch-ins. You're going to be able to U-Turn out and potentially get momentum. If you see Vaporeon's not really doing anything and they just want to opt to get more on the offensive, then you already have momentum in your favor. Ice Beam is extremely helpful versus the likes of like Setup Mints. You have Diggersby, you have Mudsdale, you have Decidueye, which generally might be the best check to Mew is the Decidueye. So having that coverage is going to be very ideal. Roost, of course, for the longevity, and then Defog is because you don't want to risk any hazards just being stacked versus you. Diggersby, of course, gets you access to spikes, and you want to be aware of that. Even though John hasn't really brought spikes on Diggersby at all, I believe. Being in his FO, I feel like I should know that. But either way, you have to at least acknowledge that it's a chance and hazard stack versus your team could actually be very annoying, especially if you have a like Life Orb Sneasel that doesn't want to take too much damage prior, especially if it wants to get a free SD and then it's taking all that Life Orb damage. Just as a strong example, you also, just for that, you want to get rid of Stealth Rocks as well. This also includes the Noivern, which has very great pivot and the ability in Frisk, which is so nice to check the items that are going to be very important on the Pelipper's to see if that Diggersby is Scarf, if that Zam is Sash. That's going to be very important information that Noivern's really going to help you out with there. Also, Bulu forces a tremendous amount of defensive options when it comes down to it, so you're really not forcing a sack every single time. Defensive Salamence does come to mind, but in general, a Substitute, Choice Band, or a Solvest set is all great for Bulu. You can bring just about any set for Bulu this week. You can even just bring like a standard like offensive Spadef set if you really want to as well. Nidoking is also looking pretty great, purely because of its coverage. It does a good job of weakening Vaporeon, like I mentioned before. You have the potential in T-Spikes if you don't feel like you need a just 4 move slot. Nidoking, because you are most likely just going to put those Stealth Rocks on Mega Aggron. I feel like that's just the most reliable rocker instead of Nidoking. But you also have the option to bring Sucker Punch on the Nidoking for Alakazam, which is very big because I feel like there's not the best revenge killers on the team that might want to come out versus Nidoking, unless it, of course, is like a Scarf Diggersby or something. But that might force Zam to come out, and then you're able to properly deal with it with Sucker Punch just to break the sash. And if it's already broken, then you might be KOing the Alakazam, which is pretty big. You can also easily run Chukka just so you're able to catch off like the Mega Diancie as well, which is pretty big. But as for the New Orleans Pelipper side, like I mentioned, Sash Zam is a great safety net for John. We're most likely seeing it this game. And in general, Psychic is just an amazing spam versus the Sableye team. And you are able to run like that Focus Blast for the Mega Aggron. You have Shadow Ball from you. So you have the coverage. And in general, Psychic is just going to be your main move to use and trying to conserve that Focus Sash. Even though he really likes the Scarf Diggersby, I would love to see a Ground Z Adamant Diggersby from the New Orleans Pelippers this week, purely because Ground Z, of course, ignores the grassy terrain, so you are able to get off a massive hit versus like that Mega Aggron, which is huge, because you are able to 2-hit KO Mega Aggron in grassy terrain with one normal EQ and then a Z Earthquake, which is huge, because otherwise it's kind of difficult to kill Mega Aggron, in all honesty, on the New Orleans Pelipper side, if you don't bring like the likes of Mudsdale or a pretty offensive Magmar or like a special Fire Blast Salamence or something of the sort. But you're also able to 2-hit KO Spadef Mew with Return if you opt to run like the Adamant Diggersby, and you have a chance of mixing it up, of course, because the Earthquake into a Return will still be able to kill the Mew if you get off Stealth Rocks and if Grassy Terrain isn't up. So like you really benefit from not being locked into stuff like that. Mega Diancie I feel like is pretty iffy this matchup. It's like in general I think it does really great late game, but it does have also great revenge killers to come in after, or just Mega Aggron switching in general, especially if you're able to keep it healthy somehow, whether that's with just the grassy terrain or you bring Rest on Mega Ag to where you can take multiple Earth powers and everything like that. But once a lot of things are weakened and like basically Mega Ag is just about done, Mega Diancie does just a very good job of cleanup in general, and I feel like that's going to be an important thing to keep in the bag for the majority of the game, as well as you just continuously have that threat of the potential magic bounce, which is always huge. You can even lead it with like Protect just to make sure if the Mega Aggron tries to overpredict and get up rocks, boom, you have rocks up on their side of the field, and you can immediately switch out and not have to worry about that anymore. Like I mentioned before, an Intimidate Bulky Mens would really help for the likes of Bulu, but it also helps versus Hawlucha. You can have Roar to get rid of its setup potential, and you get it from behind sub, but you do have to be wearing a potential Throat Chop Hawlucha that can stop you from just roaring out and potentially just sweep the rest of your team if that's your only check. But if you do want to bring Tailwind on that Mens, you're also giving Diggersby +2 in speed, which is massive, especially if you opt to bring that Ground Z Diggersby, which is just adamant. It's not locked into anything. You can absolutely abuse it. I feel like that's going to be very great for Diggersby. Magmar, I feel like, is going to be a sleeper option in this game. Not only do you provide like great offensive potential versus like the Mega Aggron and everything like that. But you also provide a Mach Punch opportunity for Sneasel, which is going to be huge, because like I mentioned, Sneasel is a big threat, especially when you pair it with that Hawlucha. So being able to have that priority that's going to be able to knock out the Sneasel while you eat an Ice Shard is going to be huge. You might just be forced to, of course, go for the knockoff versus the Magmar, hoping that you don't have Mach Punch or something of the sort. But when it comes to having Magmar, you want to make sure that you are a proper check that Sneasel and a few other things that you have decent hazard removal. So I would really like to see like a nice bulky Decidueye to help with Bulu, also having Defog to get rid of any potential hazards. So a little bit of a long analysis. We are going pretty in-depth for these matches since we have only 6 total this week. But when it came down to the votes, it was pretty split between the analysts, I'd have to say. We had 4 of the analysts going for the New Orleans Pelipers, and you guys at home also voting in favor of Pokemon and the New Orleans Pelipers, while the majority of the analysts, I believe it was 6 of them, actually voting in favor of the South Texas Sableye and Vivid Color this week. CJ, you also just opted to go with John and Pokemon this week. Is there anything you'd like to add on to the game?
No, I think you did a great job breaking it down. So it's funny because I broke this game down last week when they faced off in Week 13. And as you mentioned, neither of them really wanted to show their hand because of the likely chance that they would play again in playoffs in Week 1. And so the big threats that I called out in that game, like potentially like Scarf Salamence or Rock Polish Mega Diancie, both of those were benched. On Vivid's side, Hawlucha I thought was his biggest threat. He put that on the bench. So it sort of tells you a little bit about what these guys might be thinking. You know, they wanted to maybe save those better sets for this week, or maybe they just don't think they're as good as I do. We'll have to see kind of how they change up the strategies going into this first round of playoffs. Picking John over Vivid, you know, I actually picked Vivid to win last week, John getting the 1-0 dub. Based on, you know, kind of the Scarf Diggersby that he brought. But I think now that we're in playoffs and everything is on the line, John is kind of like the more seasoned person when it comes to these playoffs battles. So that's the main reason that I like him, besides the points that you were calling out. In the next game, we are going to be looking at a match between the Milwaukee Bewares, coached by Wolfie Glick, and the Pittsburgh Pichus, coached by Numb Nexus. Big shout out to Numb Nexus for making playoffs with this very interesting team that he's built. I've complained about it a few times over the course of the season about how I don't think it's very well balanced. It's way too passive and just is way too vulnerable to fast threats. But he found a way to make it work coming in with a playoff spot. So big shout outs to him. These two coaches played in week number 2, and it was a victory for the Bewares. They rode on the coattails of a Swords Dance Virizion to victory. I am expecting that Doublade will come in this game to prevent that from happening again. There's not really a lot of great options that Virizion has to damage Doublade a whole lot, while still being able to hit something like Zapdos super effectively. Doublade also has the added utility of switching in on and trapping the Duosion, which is potentially nice for something like Mega Medicham, which otherwise has like a pretty good matchup here. There's not really any other switch-ins to the fighting type attacks. Of course, you do have the Weezing there as a resist, but Weezing takes super effective damage from the Zen Headbutt or the Psycho Cut, whatever he chooses to go for. Depends on how comfortable he is with his Medicham and how well trained it is, how well it's going to hit those inaccurate moves. One thing that I think could be really cool on Wolfie's side is Substitute Gengar, potentially with Phytinium Z. And so Sub Gengar, I think, is pretty cool because it protects you from some of the likely counterplay to Gengar. So, for example, like an Assault Vest Skuntank could come as a way of dealing with Gengar. If it comes in as you click Substitute, you can actually hard switch, and that Substitute will be able to protect you from a little bit of that Pursuit damage, which is really nice. And then, as well, if Gengar is able to get a knockout, while keeping up its Substitute, that protects it from Doublade coming in and revenge killing with Shadow Sneak. If you don't have up that Substitute, Doublade can potentially knock it out if there's just a little bit of chip damage on the Gengar. Fight Z is probably the item of choice, even though you're running Substitute and you might like to have like Leftovers or Black Sludge for that recovery. Fight Z is just a great way to deal the most amount of damage to that Skuntank and also have a guaranteed way of hitting X-Splad, which of course is immune to your Ghost-type moves. So I think that's definitely a good option. It's just funny that recommending that because of how Wolfie's used Gengar all season. He might as well just nickname it sack fodder because it practically is sacrificed every single week. So we'll see if Gengar can redeem itself or not in this matchup. I got my fingers crossed. The other thing on Wolfie's side that I like quite a bit is Excadrill. Like, offensively, it looks okay, like, besides Zapdos and Tangrowth. But what I really like is a Subtoxic Protect Excadrill. Because basically it can beat all of its checks, like Tangrowth, Swampert, Zapdos. None of those things can really deal with a Subtoxic Protect set. They're all going to get worn down way too quickly. And the 2 Mons, of course, that are going to be immune to that Toxic, being the Skuntank and the Doublade, are not going to be appreciating Earthquake. So I think that that's got a lot of potential here. Wolfie did bench the Drill in the first game, but I am definitely going to be on the lookout for that thing to come back here. On Nexus's side, I think Zapdos is a really important Pokemon, both offensively and defensively. So defensively, it's really nice for dealing with major threats such as Tornadus, Virizion, and Excadrill, being able to resist all of the stab options from those 3 Pokemon. And then offensively, just with like electric and fire coverage, it can pretty much deal with the entire team. Like Alolan Golem is kind of the only thing that can take those combination of moves. I would probably run Roost and U-Turn in the last 2 slots. You could run it bulky, maybe run it like max HP, max special attack. It's totally up to Nexus. I think any option would be good. Maybe a little bit of offensive investment would be nice, just so you can heavily damage the Mandibuzz, as well as the Blastoise, which is looking like a pretty good wall breaker versus Nexus this week. Like we know, kind of how Nexus has so many walls on his team, but just like Hydro Pump plus Ice Beam is pretty much enough to go through all of Nexus's team. Maybe he puts HP Grass in a slot. He puts like Aqua Jet in a slot because that's been very popular on Wolfie's Blastoise sets. Or maybe he just goes with Scald in case he wants a high-powered water-type move but doesn't want to risk the chance of missing on the Hydro Pump. So again, going back to Zapdos, I think that being able to pressure that Blastoise is really important. Otherwise, Blastoise is not that easily chipped down by Nexus's team. His other win cons I don't think are too abundant. This is just mainly the nature of his team. He doesn't have a ton of great offensive win cons. But one thing that does look kind of cheeky is Curse Goodra. The reason it's kind of cheeky is because Wolfie has no Fairy type, no Dragon type, and no Ice type to deal super effective stab damage to that Goodra. And so if it goes for Curse, it's going to be boosting up on the physically defensive side, of course. At that point, basically your best chance of dealing with it is to hit it with something on the special side, but nothing can really one-shot it on the special side. Maybe like Z Sludge Wave on Gengar or something does a decent chunk of damage, but I bet Goodra is bulky enough to take that just thanks to that big, I think base 150 special defense stat. So I think that's kind of a good way to win, even though there's a lot of good physically defensive Mons like Weezing, Golem, Mandibuzz, Excadrill being able to resist the Dragon type move. None of them can really threaten Goodra once it gets 2 boosts up. You throw Dragon Tail as your mono attacking move with Rest Talk to make sure you never get subjected to Toxic, Stall, or anything like that. And then the Dragon Tail plus the opportunity to phase Pokemon around, I just think is potentially a good way to win this week. When it came time to make my pick, I actually locked in Wolfie Glick this week versus the Pittsburgh Pichus. We've got a majority of analysts and fans going in favor of Wolfie. We actually have 9 people going for him, and then 2 folks going in favor of Nexus, those being Aaron and Kriselke. You're also locking in Wolfie this week, as are the fans. So a lot of confidence in Wolfie here, our defending Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon WBE champion, looking to potentially take this game.
Yeah, I had to go for Wolfie. Not only is he the reigning champ, and I expect him to move a little bit further into playoffs than just round 1. Like you mentioned, you haven't been the biggest fan of Nexus's team. I'm also known for not being the biggest fan of it, and I feel like Wolfie's just definitely going to be able to exploit it and do very well with this team like he has been doing all season. One thing I would definitely like to see is like an ability that we don't see too much in Excadrill is in Sand Force. Majority of the time you see Sand Rush, but I feel like with the slow, bulky team that Nexus has, you can really abuse Sand Force and get like 2 KOs on things that Nexus would typically not think be a 2 KO by just abusing the damage output and the boost that you get in the sand. I feel that'd be really great, and then you can easily like clean up with Pokemon such as the Torn and the Gengar, etc. Because you, the only real flaw that comes with that, of course, is the Metacham's going to outspeed you, but I feel like you can do that pretty well with like Dwojin and a few other things. So I don't feel like that'd be the biggest hindrance in the long run, especially if you are able just to break apart the fat in general, and then have your your fast, speedy things clean up in the end and just do the minimum amount of damage. So I like to see that on Wolfie's side, but overall, I do feel like this is just in his favor. Nexus has performed well this season, but you're going up against the reigning champ with a very solid team that he's comfortable with. So that's very intimidating for round 1. For the next match, we have the Florida Gators, coached by It's Gator, going up against the Bullet Punch Club and Uzi Gunner. For this match, once again, like I just mentioned before, we have a run back of Week 13. Uzi actually had to beat Gator to get into playoffs, as CJ mentioned way earlier into this video. Was able to pick up a 3-0 versus Gator, but Uzi had to show a lot of his hand going into this match because he was committed to trying to make it to the playoffs. And I feel like it's going to be really, really hard to fool Gator like that again. Not saying he didn't fool him necessarily. He definitely just played well overall. But like Gator's not going to be surprised by some of the stuff that he's going to see this time. He's going to expect him to be a little bit more on the offensive with some of his plays, like going hard Aerodactyl versus like Frostlass, things like that. He'll be looking out for stuff like that. While Uzi will also be aware of some things, such as the Dawn Fan having the Rock Z for like the Mega Arrow, which was amazing prep on Gator's part. So there's a few things that are going to even out between that, because that was more of a serious game compared to like the New Orleans Pelipers and the South Texas Sableyes. So we're going to be a little bit more of a different match going into this with the Gators and the Bullet Punch Club. First off, I do see a bulk up Shuka Zorora being a great bring in general. It has a really good matchup and has a strong win con. You're also really able to catch that Mega Arrow off guard if you're really just expecting to pick up the KO with like Earthquake, of course. Getting up that bulk up's also going to help if they just try to opt to go for like the Stone Edge. As long as you're boosting your defensive stats versus the opposing Bullet Punch Club, you're doing well in general. It helps versus like Mean Shao. It helps versus the likes of like Licky Licky Arcanine, stuff like that. So that's definitely something we could see. Frostlass was thrown away pretty early in the match that they had last week, but I feel like it's just great in general. It was just Specs Tapu Fini that kind of caught him off guard, because he did have a bulky for Tapu Fini in general, which would have been pretty nice. But I just think it has a great matchup between the likes of Destiny Bond, Ice Shard, Spikes, and Freeze Dry. It just really just runs through the entire team, in my opinion. It just does really well. And Rotom Frost is technically a designated switch-in, but I highly doubt we're going to see a Rotom Frost in playoffs. I would not want to see one in playoffs, in all honesty, unless it's just a really good bring. It even has the defog to be a hard counter for those spikes, so that's a few things you have to watch out for. But a bulky offensive Mega Hera worked very well last game and is going to be another problem this game. I feel like it's just going to do a great job of wall breaking and taking hits from the fat and just like obliterating them down. Of course, you have to be aware of that regenerator. That was an issue. You got like Mean Shallow and stuff like that, but it was able to get it back, of course, along with the Amoonguss and everything like that. Archeops is looking also very good late game. If you are to get rid of that item again and just run Acrobatics, that's going to be very good in the long run as well. Of course, you just have to watch out for that Mega Arrow. Mega Arrow, of course, is going to be a main threat to both the Mega Heracross and the Archeops, but once that drops, those things are looking very great, as Gator proved with the Rogazzi hitting the Mega Arrow, and then the Hera and the Archeops was just a massive problem. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar strategy going into this next game, purely because it is a great matchup for them in general. But in regards to the Mega Arrow, I definitely feel like Uzi's going to be a lot more safe when it comes to Mega Arrow this week. He's going to respect the Dawn Fan and make sure he gets the amount of chip he needs to. He's not going to just try to 2KO it on his own, because now that he knows that Roxy is a potential threat, he's not going to just let it in there and try to 2KO it himself. He's going to get chip on Dawn Fan beforehand and then let Mega Arrow come in later and just try to KO it from there. But in general, the double ground and Rhyperior and Dawn Fan and the double Ice Shard and Dawn Fan and Frostlass is actually pretty scary for Mega Arrow, but I feel like it's just a necessity, especially if it's not going to be a Scarf Zorora. You really want something to outspeed that thing, because it can be a huge nuisance, and having Mega Arrow in general, it's just a great Pokemon. Very strong offensively, and the speed that it provides for your team is so huge. If Gator opts to bring a fairly similar team to last time without Heatran, I definitely see a Specs Kyurem actually being pretty annoying. Like on paper in the matchup, he's saying it's not going to be that great, especially with the likes of the Heatran, and then you also have like the Pyukumuku and stuff like that. Gator not really bringing the Pyukumuku like ever, I think, but Heatran, of course, would be a designated counter, but apart from Earth Power coverage, but you have to predict that because you're gonna, if you decide to lock yourself into Specs, if you opt to be like an annoying sub pressure set and you have like the Earth Power and everything, that could be a little bit more beneficial. But I feel like Kyurem could still be a decent bring in general and could definitely capitalize on that. But the regen pivots, like I mentioned in Meanshao and Amoonguss, are going to be pretty big because not only do you give yourself momentum with like the Meanshao with U-turn, you get rid of items with knockoff, you get rid of any like setup with Amoonguss, Clear Smog, stuff like that. And you just have great Pokemon in Amoonguss in general. Just them being able to pivot and get their health back, you really have to be aware of those switches this time around. Maybe you want to abuse hazards more in this game. Maybe you really want to be a little bit more on the offensive and call out his switches. I feel like those are going to be pretty big plays going into this match. And this overall, though, when it came down to playoffs, I really just had to opt to go with Gator. Yes, he did lose to Uzi last week, but I don't feel like Uzi's going to be able to do that again because he brought a lot of good stuff last week, and I don't feel like Gator's going to let that happen again, and Gator's going to prep a little bit harder and capitalize on it because I also feel like Gator didn't bring what a potential 100% team that he could have brought because he knew no matter what, he's in playoffs last week. It didn't really matter too much if he lost to Uzi. If anything, that was the time to download and gather data on Uzi, which I feel like we're going to see put amazing pressure versus him this week in round 1 of playoffs. So with that being said, I decided to go with Gator, and for the analysts, it was actually kind of split. We got about 6 analysts going in favor of the Florida Gators and 5 going in favor of the Bullet Punch Club and Uzi. So basically almost 50-50. And then as for the fans at home, we also have you guys going in favor of the Florida Gators. Once again, we have Uzi Gunner locking himself in with the Bullet Punch Club. Has to be confident for these playoffs. Confidence is going to win you the entire thing, as well as amazing prep and gameplay like he had in the previous week. CJ, you also opted to go with Gator this week. Is there anything you'd like to add on?
Yeah, just basically the same thing that you said. Like, due to the circumstances of the last 2 weeks, where Uzi had to, pretty much go all out in order to get his playoff spot, and Gator was in a position where, yes, he technically could have gotten the number 1 overall seed and gotten a bye if he had gone all out. But there's really no reason to try too hard. When he was really comfortable in his number 2 seed. He had no chance of dropping to number 3 seed. He could afford to not give it 100%. Definitely expecting that to change this week. Gator's just been so dominant throughout this whole season, just losing in the final game and then in the first game with the game versus Patty Trills. Made a few changes to his team after that, like adding Don Fan, for example. So yeah, Gator is just, as great as Uzi's been, he's been 7-1 in this season. And that is really fantastic. Like, I just think Gator's body of work is a little bit more impressive. I think his team is a little bit better. Like Uzi, I don't know how he's been able to do it with this particular team. It's just not that strong. Yeah, I'm excited for a lot of the things that you called out, like substitute Mega Heracross, and things like that. Being able to do a lot of damage in this game. I'm a big fan of Uzi's, but I'm a bigger believer in Gator. Our 4th game is going to be a pretty fun one between the Minnesota Vikavolt coached by A-Drive and the Newcastle Nidoking coached by Patters. This match is going to be electrifying. We have 2 very speedy electric types headlining this game, with A-Drive having Mega Manectric and Patters having that Tapu Koko. I think Manectric in particular looks really nice, especially if it's benefiting from that electric terrain that Tapu Koko will be setting up anytime it comes in. Hippowdon is really the only response to Mega Manectric. But I think Hippo, it's pretty easily dealt with things like Skarmory and even like Gastrodon and Venusaur to a lesser extent. Venusaur is nice because basically Hippowdon has to go for like Ice Fang or something like that to deal with the Venusaur. It can't Toxic it like it could with the Gastrodon. So yeah, Hippo just basically is easily dealt with. Yeah, but again, the headliner there is the Skarm. And the Skarm really neutralizes Hippowdon's ability to be a hazard setter this week. Just because anytime it tries to set up rocks, Skarm just immediately comes in and defogs him away. He's never going to be able to get up rocks in this game. He might have to go with like Terrakion with rocks, which is a shame because I think like a SD Terrakion is really, really good in this game. is such a disgusting wall breaker, this game, actually. You look at the core of Venusaur, Florges, Skarmory, and Gastrodon, and none of those Pokemon take a +2 Stone Edge or a +2 Close Combat after Rocks. You slap Rock Z on that, and then you don't even need a boost to like one-shot something like Fizz Def Florges, basically, after a little bit of chip. So I think that's really good. But yeah, if Hippowdon is like the response to Manectric, like that's great, but it's easily dealt with, and it loses a lot of utility because it doesn't have any way to keep up Rocks versus Dan's team. On the other side, you do have that Tapu Koko, like I said, the other headlining electric type. It's definitely spooky this week, but it kind of needs a lot of coverage. And so in that way, I don't think that you're going to be relying on Tapu Koko as much as a pivot like you do sometimes in other weeks. I think basically like you can run like an expert belt set or something like that and go with either Thunderbolt or Wild Charge, then go with Brave Bird, Dazzling Gleam, and Grass Knot. So Brave Bird allows it to hit Venusaur, Grass Knot allows it to hit Gastrodon, Dazzling Gleam allows it to hit Kyurem. Basically dealing with all of those electric resists there. I guess like Manectric as well, like Dazzling Gleam helps to hit that a little bit. So it stinks to lose the utility options that are on Tapu Koko, which Patters has really executed well this season. He's brought sets like Defog, he's brought screens, lots of really great options on Tapu Koko. Some of my other favorite ones are like Taunt Roost, Calm Mind Roost, and things like that. So you don't have any of those options, but what you do have is a really solid revenge killer. If you get chip on everything else on A-Drive's team, there's not going to be a whole lot that can stop the Tapu Koko in the late game, so that's definitely pretty nice. Other potential fun win cons that I see, don't sleep on Sunny Day Venusaur. So Venusaur with Chlorophyll going for Hidden Power Fire, Giga Drain, and potentially like Z Sludge Bomb actually looks pretty hard to deal with if you get Snorlax weakened or removed. Just because, there's really nothing that can switch into that combination of moves. It has a lot of super effective options for basically everything on the team. I think that's quite nice. Calm Mind HP Fire Florges is pretty good as well. There's not a lot of really good fairy resists on Patter's side. It's basically just the Venomoth and the Escavalier, both of which are going to be weak to that fire type option on the Hidden Power Fire. Basically, there's like two sets that can beat it this week. I think like Quiver Dance Roost Venomoth would be able to deal with that, but I think that's a less likely bring just because there is a Talonflame on A-Drive's side. Why would you bring a setup Venomoth when there is a potential Gale Wings Talonflame over there? And like I mentioned, it's going to be hard to pressure that thing with Rocks this game. And then your other option I already called out is like a Roxy Terrakion to potentially just nuke the heck out of that Florges, send it back to Kingdom Come. So like besides those two, like I do think Calm Mind Florges is pretty decent. I guess you could also include like Akaberry Escavalier in there as a potential option. I'm kind of thinking that like Escavalier, like maybe run it like Assault Vest this week just so it can take like a little bit damage from like Kyurem Black, even Manectric if you need Florges pretty easily. So if Assault Vest Escavalier would also be okay dealing with that sort of Florges set. The other thing I wanted to call out, this one on Patter's side, Mega Gyarados is a pretty decent offensive threat this week. I quite like the option of Dragon Dance plus Taunt. So Taunt is kind of cool because it allows you to beat two of the main checks to Gyarados, being Skarmory and Gastrodon. The two of them just don't have enough offensive output to really threaten Gyarados all that much. They're going to be relying on statusing that thing, phasing that thing, and then just relying on either Recover or Roost to basically stall that thing out. But if you do have that taunt on that Gyarados, you're going to prevent that from happening. You can get a couple more boosts and be able to do a lot of damage to the team. It just needs a tiny bit of chip on like Venusaur and Florges. It would also appreciate Kyurem Black getting to about 50%. Again, it's going to be a little hard to do that with Rocks, but maybe you can make some sort of lure option on a different Pokemon to get off a nice hit on it. So then Gyarados with Dragon Dance Taunt and just his dual stabs, I think, could be pretty powerful in this game. In terms of the picks, this is a really tough one because I love both of these coaches, and they both had good seasons, but I am going to be leaning in favor of A-Drive. A-Drive is a little bit, again, the situation like where I called it with John versus Vivid. Like in this game, A-Drive is just like the like the more seasoned playoff battler. There's a lot of things on his side that I like a lot. It's funny because through that whole analysis, I didn't even talk once about Kieran Black, which is phenomenal here, outspeeding 7 out of the 10 Mons on Patters' side. So like relying on that to wall break and all the other threats that I called out, I think are really going to propel him to victory. It's a pretty even split, I guess what I'll say is there's 4 analysts going in favor of the Nidokings, and then 7 analysts plus the fans going in favor of A Drive. So even though, like, in terms of the standings, like the Patters and the Newcastle Nidokings were close to the bottom seed for most of the season. Actually, in this last week, they were able to bump themselves up to the 5 seed, which is pretty cool to get this matchup versus A Drive. But despite that, there is still some faith amongst our analysts that he can pull off what is presumably an upset here. What are your thoughts going into this game here, there, Ben?
Well, they did have a great match in the regular season. I'm looking forward to seeing them battle again going at it in round 1. I'm a big fan of Terrakion, and like you mentioned, it is just going to go with Roxy if you do opt to bring that. Talonflame with the Gale Wings for the Venomoth was a good bring up. You also have, of course, the Accelerock and the Lycanroc Dust, which is pretty big. But I still say I don't see Venomoth potentially having that good of a matchup because it is one of those sleeper mons. But overall, probably one of the favorite sets that you mentioned is that Venusaur. I would love to see something like that work out. It's definitely something that you probably want to catch Patters with off guard, because in general, Dan has been playing just with about like similar teams or playstyles in general, with like a set Wincon and like Kieran Black or his Mega Manectric or Lycanroc. Like those are basically how he goes about all of his games, and that's a little bit easy to exploit, especially with this similar bulk you bring every week as well, and just Carving and Gastrodon, ideally. So you have to be a little bit aware of that for playoffs. You're definitely going to want to mix it up more. Even though I'm going for Dan, even though I'm kind of like cutting him a little slack, it seems like, but I really just want to see him do a little bit more because I know he's capable of more. Getting comfortable with something is good, but you don't want to be doing it so often that it hurts you. And going into playoffs is definitely a great time to mix it up. So I really just hope he's able to bring something different so he's still able to pick up a win versus Patters and move on to the next round of playoffs. For the next match, we have the Durham Druddigons, coached by 6-foot Hacks and Leo, go up against the Chicago Cubchews and Galactic Elliot. Now, this was a match in the regular season where Elliot was able to pick up a victory versus the Durham Druddigons, which was a quote-unquote upset based off of records and everything. So this could be an interesting one going into playoffs. Leo is a phenomenal battler, and he's definitely looking pretty solid matchup-wise, I'd have to say. Mega Lopunny is looking absolutely terrifying in this matchup overall. Veil is probably the best counter up against the Mega Lopunny in general. A really bulky Girder will also help you out. Of course, you do have the Mach Punch to help you with just the priority, being able to deal with it like that. Other than that, I feel like you really just could struggle with Mega Lopunny. In all honesty, I feel like a Power-Up Punch last resort, Mega Lopunny might just be able to blow back the team, and that would just be something pretty interesting to see in playoffs, and I feel like in general, a lot of people don't prep for it as much as they should because it is a threatening set because Mega Lopunny's amazing speed and everything, and just that normal stab and of course the ability to hit those ghost types, it's just so big. Especially when you don't have a great steel type on a team such as the Cubchews with their steel only being the Alolan Sandslash. Something kind of odd that I'd like to see is kind of like a Fire Savali that's pretty offensive with the likes of Ice Beam and Thunderbolt. You can of course like switch out the typing of Fire for the multi-attack to opt with something like the Ice Beam or T-Bolt. You can switch it out with one of those typings, but I feel like all 3 of those typings together just gives you amazing coverage versus the majority of the team. But if you are benefiting from that fire typing, you can abuse something like the Alolan Ninetales, the Serena, and the Alolan Sandslash. I feel like it's just a little bit something that's not normally out there on the offensive side. That's something that could definitely capitalize on the Cubchews team. But one of the most reliable Pokemon that you definitely should bring if you're Leo is a Solvest Muck. We all know what this thing does. A Alolan Muck, to be more specific. Not only does it just eat hits from the likes of like Alolan Ninetales, especially like Hoopa or Chandelure, you're also able to run Brick Break, which allows you to break Veil, which is going to be pretty huge. Mainly because Leo doesn't have the best defoggers. His only defoggers are Savali and Moltres, I believe, for him if he wants to get rid of Veil. So having a Brick Break option is going to be pretty big. Whether he all installs it, like put that on Lopunny, I believe it gets Brick Break. That's something you could potentially do. But Apart from that, Mega or Alolan Muck is just looking very solid in general. It helps versus a lot of the Pokemon, and 1,000,000% needs to be a bring. I'd be really surprised for a Pokemon that Leo's very comfortable with, such as that, not to be brought. Reuniclus, I also think, is really difficult for the Cupcheese to switch into. Not only does it deal great damage, but it's also a great thing to come in versus the Girder if the Girder is the ideal check through the Mega Lopunny. Just being able to counter that would be pretty helpful, and in general, then it's just hard for something to switch in on the Psychic. Bulky setup Manaphy also has decent potential, I'd have to say, but Leo's not that big on Manaphy, so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see it. We definitely get to see stuff such as Mega Lopunny, Alolan Mug, Tauros, Reuniclus, stuff like that for Leo and coming into playoffs. He really only picks stuff he's really comfortable with, and he's never fully happy about his entire draft. There's always a few mons that he's iffy about that he doesn't bring as often as the others, so that's something you have to look out for in playoffs. As for the Cubjuice side, I would love to see like an SD substitute or protect Scolipede with like Ground Z with Bulldoze. That can really capitalize, of course, on like the Steelix or the Alolan Muck being able to get rid of those things and just potentially sweep in the later because of that amazing speed boost ability. I could also see a Hazard Stack Scolipede really just hindering the Durham Druddigons. Like I mentioned, they have a lack of hazard removal, so having the ability of getting up a lot of hazards at the beginning of the game could be huge between stacks and then or spikes stack, and then you're able to get other stuff later. I don't feel like Toxic Spikes would be that big purely because the Alolan Muck is likely to come and just be able to deal with everything like I mentioned before. Veil is going to be very big in this matchup. Alolan Ninetales can't do that great offensively, but overall you're just trying to get Veil up for the rest of your team. You might be able to bring something cheesy like Encore just to help you versus a few things and everything like that, but otherwise you're really just getting a Veil, and that's all Alolan Ninetales wants to do in this match. Mega Chomp is looking pretty good offensively, I'd have to say. One thing I would really like to see is like Sandstorm support with like a Smooth Rock to let Mega Chomp use Sand Force and absolutely hit like everything extremely hard, because Leo really doesn't have the best switch-ins when it comes into it. Like, just EQ spam is really solid versus Leo's team in general. Moltres might be like the best thing, but of course you just want one rock move and Moltres is dead. Fairy Savali might be like the ideal counter or something of the sort, but really I see like Mega Garchomp being a big issue, and just giving it Sand, you get chip off versus the majority of his team, and you're also able just to get the attack boost for Mega Chomp, which would actually be pretty cool because you don't see it too often, Sand team with Mega Chomp, so that'd be something. But when it came down to it for a pick, I definitely had to go with Leo. Yes, Elliott upset him in the regular season, but Leo is just overall more reliable, and I like his team. In just when it comes to playoffs, Leo has amazing experience. He's a great contender for the belt for sure. Also, with as big as a wrestling fan as Leo wants, he would actually like wrestle people for this belt, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him want to go all the way for it. But when it came down to the rest of the picks, we only had 3 people, and Chris Cobain, Dr. Slacking, and It's Soccer going in favor of the Chicago Cubs. Everyone else just opted to go with the Durham Druddigons, and you guys at home also opted to go with the Durham Druddigons as well. 2 lock-ins for Jacob and JB Westside for 6-foot hacks this week. CJ, is there anything you'd like to add for this match?
Yeah, just that, you could say that, maybe the matchup isn't so much in Leo's favor because he lost the first matchup in the regular season, but you just look at the mons on his side, and you just see how few responses there are on Elliott's side, like the Lopunny, like the Reuniclus, things like that. And I don't see how I could go against Leo in this game, even with that previous regular season result. There's a whole lot of other scary options. I did the breakdown for this back in week 12 when they played, so again, not all that long ago that they played. The Lopunny was good. I also liked this like potentially a setup Manaphy. You bring up a good point that Leo doesn't really like those sorts of Manaphy sets. He prefers like utility options or AV on Manaphy. But yeah, just so many threats that I think that that's why I'm going to be favoring him here. In the last playoff match of the week, we have a cool match between the Maryland Terrapins, coached by Under the Radar, aka Kelly, and the Sin City Scissors, and their coach, of course, is Patty Trills. So yeah, they played in week 10. It was a game that went to the Sin City Scissors. There was a really great game plan coming out of Patty Trills in that game. He was able to apply a lot of pressure with Specs Ribombi, and also just getting a lot of momentum throughout the game with something like a U-turn on that Ribombi. Kelly really got trapped in the vortex, I would say, in terms of losing momentum on like practically every turn. Is Kelly going to be able to prevent that this time around? We'll have to see. One way to prevent that from happening, of course, is to keep up his rocks in the game between him and Patty. Wigglytuff got up rocks early in the game, but Golbat was able to defog those away. So obviously, if the Golbat doesn't come, that's going to be one way to help get the hazards up throughout the whole game. But he might want to evaluate, bringing another rocker or even bringing multiple rockers, just because of how good it is at deterring that sort of U-turn abuse. A really heat option would be to bring eject button on something like Milotic or Wigglytuff. So you can use that to switch in on an attack, such as U-turn, or even just a regular attacking move like Earthquake on Lando with the Milotic, or he switches in on Moonblast with Wigglytuff. And then he's able to immediately bounce into something that has a more favorable matchup, can threaten those things offensively. So I think that's quite nice. In terms of the offense for Kelly, we're going to have to see what he chooses to do. Team MVPs are Manitan. It does not have a good matchup here. You have dual Intimidate options on Landorus and Incineroar, the potential of Rough Skin, Rocky Helmet, Dredagon. You also have Seismitoad there as being a pretty bulky fire resist, and could potentially run Rocky Helmet. All of those things are deterring Darmanitan from coming in this game. So where does the offense otherwise come from? Maybe you go with Zygarde. He brought a banded Zygarde in the first game, but I actually kind of like a lure Zygarde this week. Zygarde does get some cool options, such as Grass Knot to hit the Seismitoad potentially. You can also rock HP Ice to do the maximum amount of damage to Lando, which is a pretty good default response to Zygarde. Run like Superpower for Ferrothorn, or just run like either like 1,000 Arrows with Ground Z, or even like Earth Power with Ground Z. Another cool option would be to go with like Core Enforcer. That would do a chunk of damage to things like Incineroar, Dredagon, things like that. So if he doesn't have like a wall-breaking Zygarde, then what are some other things that he can go with? I kind of like Calm Mind Mesprit. Probably with HP Fighting as its secondary attacking move. If you just have Mesprit at +1, it does really good versus all things on the team not named Incineroar or Ferrothorn. +1 Side Shock does 2-shot a Mega Alakazam, so that's pretty nice. Incineroar and Ferrothorn, again, those are the main checks to something like that, but both of those Pokemon are checked, or they're not checked, but they are pressured by Superior. So if you have a Superior set that can just throw off damage versus Incineroar and Ferrothorn, maybe you have like a Sub-Leech Seed set to annoy the Incineroar. If you can get up rocks, that also helps weaken the Incineroar with time. But you could see potential Calm Mind Mesprit being good. And then on the defensive side, like maybe he goes with Melodic. Just a regular Melodic with Toxic is kind of problematic. Patty brought the Raichu last time, presumably to apply offensive pressure to Milotic. We'll have to see if that comes this time. I think Ferrothorn is just a little bit more likely to come because it does deal with like toxic recover variants of Milotic a little bit better. And then the thing that you have to know about Kelly is that he really doesn't like to bring hazard removal. On this team in particular, he just doesn't have any great hazard removing options. He's relying on Mega Sableye mostly to deter hazards. But in a matchup where Specs Ribombi is just so scary, I don't even know if Mega Sableye comes this game. It was kind of dead weight in the previous matchup. So if you bring a Ferrothorn that has spikes, and it really wants to, you can really use that to punish the pivoting that Kelly likes to do with things like Melodic and Wigglytuff, and even Zygarde to an extent. So lots of problems there. For Patty, like the options I think are pretty straightforward. He did a good job of exploiting the matchup in the first day game. Definitely expecting Specs Ribombi again. Has virtually no switch-ins, and it outspeeds everything on Kelly's team. So unless he goes with some sort of Scarf option to revenge kill it, it's just going to be punishing Kelly throughout the whole game. Unless he decides to bring something spicy, like specially defensive Darmanitan, that thing just eats all game long. It goes without saying, things like Double Dance Landorus with the Fly Z to go for Supersonic Sky Strikes is really scary in this game. Depending upon the situation, you don't even have to click both options. If Kelly relies more on his bulky options, like with Milotic, Mesprit, Wigglytuff, just go for Swords Dance and break through the team that way. If he tries to go more offensive with like Raichu or Scyther or Scarf Darmanitan, things like that, just set up a Rock Polish, and there's very little counterplay for that. Alakazam has been a major all-star all season long for Patty Trills. Kelly did try to bring like Bandit Extreme Speed to deal with the Zygarde in the last game, so I do like something like Substitute Mega Alakazam to prevent that from being so effective for revenge killing. Just the sort of standard Zam sets with like the Focus Blast and Dazzling Gleam to do very good damage to the majority of the mons on Kelly's side. I think could be very, very scary. Now it's time to look at the votes for this game. I'm actually going to be going in favor of Under the Radar Kelly this game. And in a kind of surprise move, we actually have 10 of the 11 analysts and fans going in favor of Kelly here. Aaron going for Patty Trails, of course, locking him in as he does every single week. This is a little bit surprising to me, Ben, considering that Patty did win that first game. But sometimes, kind of like in the case of Gator versus Uzi, that kind of works to the advantage of the team that lost. Like, Gator is probably a little bit favored in that game because he knows what's going to beat him. And so in this game, Kelly knows exactly how to prepare, or hopefully knows exactly how to prepare to deal with some of those top-tier threats like the Ribombi, like the Alakazam, and things like that. You seem to feel that that's also an advantage for Kelly because you're going to be picking him this week as well.
Of course, that's going to be a great advantage for Kelly going into this game, but in general, Kelly's just got the more experience. He's one of the well-known Draft League battlers, and he's just going to be doing very well. And even though I do think that overall that the Sin City Sorors have a better team, it's probably one of my favorite teams still in the entire league. I feel like Kelly's still going to have an advantage over it because Kelly is just beyond comfortable with his team. He's probably one of the most comfortable coaches with their teams, so I definitely feel like he's going to capitalize on a lot of things that he wasn't able to in the first game. Like you mentioned, he's going to notice all those mistakes, and he's going to be able to work on those, make sure he doesn't get caught up in those hazards and pivots. He's going to do his best this game, but hopefully he will at least acknowledge that maybe hazard removal is something that he needs this game. Hopefully, maybe, please, for the love of God, Kelly. But just have to be a little bit aware of that going into the playoffs game. But, yep, I have to pull for Kelly. I have to. It's just in my heart. I need to. But I love Patty's team and how well he's been doing with it in general.
Great. Well, folks, that is going to wrap up our analysis for the first round of playoffs for WBE season number 3. We want to thank you guys, of course, for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the first round of games this weekend. I'm going to toss to Ben to do a few plugs before we sign off.
Of course, we're doing the plugs like we do every week because we appreciate all you guys do, but we have to make sure that we're running everything smoothly here. So I'd like to give a quick shout out, of course, to all the coaches in the league. Make sure to drop a sub for them everywhere that you can. Support them for their battles coming out in playoffs. Even make sure to go support some of the coaches that maybe not in playoffs. I know some coaches are planning to at least still do battles while playoffs are going on if they opted or if they weren't able to make it, unfortunately. So just so they can still have content and look forward to that. Also, drop us up to the WBE channel if you still haven't. We're going to be putting a lot of stuff for playoffs coming off here. Probably going to be interviewing finalists for championship games, going over championship match, maybe something like that. Of course, we still have some of our other series going on to playoffs, such as the Pick'ems. So look forward to that. You can pick up a shirt for your favorite team going into playoffs or one of your teams that were favored throughout the entire season. We would really appreciate that. You look amazing in a shirt. Trust me, I look good in one myself. And of course, big shout out to the Pokemon servers. Once again, the Minecraft servers, having a lot of fun with that. They're doing great updates every time, and they're providing with the best content there. We thank them for the support that they gave us this season, of course. And with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for this Pick'ems for round 1. Went a little bit longer than we expected still, but we want to make sure we went in depth for you guys, so let us know if you still appreciate this going real in depth on all the games, since we will have fewer games for the remainder of playoffs, of course, reducing every time. But that's going to be it from this week, guys. CJ, you got anything else to say?
Nope, yeah, just make sure you guys check out these games. I'm super excited. This is going to be a great run to close out Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon.
For sure. All right. Deuces.
Bye-bye.